Okay, we're live. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the School for Philosophy and Education. So today is Baldwin's 101st birthday, and we honored him today after a year of celebrating him as a theorist of crisis, the entirety of last year, and leading on to today. And so today we're going to talk about the crisis produced by deindustrialization, by decades of deindustrialization, and the cost of imperialism. And we're going to ask the question today, whether we are nearing a stage, an irreversible stage in the crisis of empire. And we're going to talk about some, political commentators in particular who have been asking this question. So, without further ado, I'll ask Doc to begin the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Sambarto, and happy birthday to Albert. And we're eating cake that Michelle made. She's smiling so much these days. I think it has something to do with Albert moving to Philly. I guess I must say this. And Albert gifted me with the Catholic Bible. And when I first met him, we were talking about the different Bibles, the Protestant, King James, and the Catholic Bible. So without saying a lot, I want to thank you for that gift. And I look forward to getting into it because all of this, as you know, relates to what we're thinking about sociologically, Black gods, or really the Black proletariat. So I just want to correct some things that I didn't fully flesh out or made slight mistakes about. And this, of course, I have to say, Alice has said to me that, Doc, you need to explain to us what sociology is. And I intend to, I won't do it today. Sociology is a vast field of knowledge, of research, of worldviews, of ideology. And I'll try to explain that maybe in coming weeks, but I do want to do that because so much of the way that I talk is influenced by sociology and not, for example, political economy. Just a small thing, Alice. Political economy begins from the assumption of homo economics. I think that's economic man or rational, which is such a narrow conception. Sociology, at least in the Du Boisian sense, tries to look at the human being. It is a greater, more in-depth science of humanity, and therefore it fits what we do. But anyway, having said that, we were talking about what, and I didn't use this term last time or the time before, what actually is the peopling of North Philadelphia. And pretty much the peopling of North Philly with African Americans, mainly from the South, principally from South Carolina. So I want to underline this concept, the peopling of North Philly. This occurs at the same time that there is a repeopling of the nation with immigrants from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe. But our discussion is both demographic, that is the numbers and the people who come. Demography is a subfield of sociology. I won't say more about that right now, but demos from the Greek word people But a lot of what we talk about, as I said last time, is demography. We're also talking about geography. No people have been so confined as Black people are to certain prescribed geographies. Black folk have never and do not now have free access to the American landscape in any respect. And the third is the genetic and phenotypic types. This is very important in defining the landscape, the boundaries of Black people, because the system of white supremacy is predicated upon phenotype differences. Black folk are the most diverse phenotypic community in the United States. You have, well, let me just say this because I know this must sometimes cause a lot of questions for people who are not familiar with the interior life of the Black community. Let me say it this way. We are very comfortable with the vast phenotypic differences among us, you know? So you get the extremes of the very, very dark, unassimilated, genetically African, more or less, on the one side. And then you get, on the other extreme, people who are so close to white, it's hard for people who don't understand what a Black person is to say, oh, that's a white person. But a Black person would pretty much know just from so many gestures and habits and other things that they're not. But this vast kaleidoscope of phenotypes among Black people is an area of research and study. Du Bois began that in his Atlantis studies and such. Most of the Black people who came were from small towns in the South, literally small towns. We were not allowed to live in larger cities in the South. Perhaps in a place like Birmingham, which was the only really industrialized part of the South. They came from a political economy based on sharecropping. I think to say sharecropping doesn't really explain what it was. It was close to what at one point in Europe and Asia was called feudalism. It was a debt economy where the people who worked the land were always in debt. And to keep them on the land and constantly working, you had to keep them in constant debt. In other words, they would do the work of planting and then harvesting, and to eat for the rest of the time, they had to borrow money from the owners of the land. But it was also a political system and a cultural system of Jim Crow. The word Jim Crow, I'm confused all the time about why they called it Jim Crow. But it was a system, not just of segregation, that does not capture the depth of it. It was a system of containment and control of a vast part of the working class of the nation and of the South. It was a regime of terror and threat and abuse. Even to this day, you know, we talk about the original sin as though we had atoned for the original sin, but it's more than the original sin. It was a system of government, of control of a people, of a proletariat. And it was finally a regime of terror. Black folk then, and I would say to a good part now, we live in terror. Fear of retribution. And of course, the system is always capable then and now of mobilizing, as they have done, revenge against Black people. No other people in this society has ever experienced this type of mobilization of the population to carry out a program of revenge against a people for the very idea of struggling for freedom. It is, and if you deconstruct the language and the practices, what we're looking at is a regime of revenge against Black people for daring to fight for freedom. And I'm not exaggerating. An entire people, which after the Civil War and during Reconstruction, were about 4 to 5 million people who, after the defeat of Reconstruction, could not vote and had no civil rights. Even though the post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution, 14th Amendment said we were citizens with the right to due process. And the 15th Amendment said we had the right to vote. This was all overturned, and as we have talked before, I don't have the language, the inhuman insult of the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which said that the civil rights of Black people didn't matter in the face of the need for the state to protect whiteness. I'm sorry I don't have better language. It's seldom discussed. People do not understand Plessy v. Ferguson and what it meant in terms of the Constitution. And what it said is that whiteness must be protected before the rights of Black people, which then added a dimension of insult to the immigration of Europeans from 1880 to 1920 to repeople the United States with white people or potentially white people. This also was an act against the Black masses. So any study of the history of Black people must be a study of the history of their consciousness. We cannot understand them unless we understand how they see the world and why they see the world this way and how they feel, as they should, that no one else in this society understands or really has that much empathy for them. Part of Black consciousness is the sense that that we are viewed as unworthy, as less than everybody else. And everybody else looks at us that way. And there's abundant evidence of it. Hence, the history of the consciousness of Black people must account for or must be seen in the crystallization of Black gods. And God for Black people is not God for white people. And we must understand why these people sought their own gods. And as I said last time, I just want to repeat, we'll go more into this. Black gods represent the highest achievement of human values, of love, of freedom, of art, of beauty, you know, and such. To distort this and to thus deprive people of their gods, of their spiritual strivings, is a further crime against Black people, which continues to this day. If you want to understand something about the Black gods, and hear the great work of Arthur Fawcett, great sociology, discarded in most departments of sociology. Nonetheless, it is a great contribution. If you want to understand these gods, contrast them with the white gods. They are the complete opposite of the Black gods. There's no way to get around it. The gods of white people are the gods of the status quo, the gods of white supremacy, the gods that say to white people, you have what you have because you deserve it. Black people are where they are because they deserve to be there. And in this regard, there is no compromise between the white gods and the Black gods. They are complete opposites, complete opposites. All one needs to do is to study the Baptists, the white Baptists of the South, which up until the last 50 years was the majority of the white Christians in the South. But then look at the evangelicals, which is kind of a white grassroots rebellion against the establishment. But yet it is the same thing all over again. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know we have things to do. After the civil rights movement and the great role of the Black church and King and Lawson and so many others, to contextualize the struggle for freedom within the great moral arc of humanity, you undermine that. You mobilize a nation against that, and even Black people against that. It shows ill intent. It shows who you are. And this is what, this is human. This is a human reality. People did this. People believe this way. And it's not enough to say, well, they don't have class consciousness. BS. Whether they have it or not, they can still commit crimes. Look at Israel. Well, they came forward with a prosperity gospel. T.D. Jakes, you probably never heard of him. He's the he's the most popular, richest, well-known Black evangelical preacher who was housed in, I think, Dallas, Texas. T.G. Jakes is the major representative of the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is the opposite of the freedom gospel of the Black gods. T.D. Jakes is a blackface appropriation of the white gods and the white aspirations. It is an appeal to a kind of weakness in Black consciousness among certain. And there, all people have these vulnerabilities. People who've struggled for freedom, and then the narrative is appropriated by the ruling class, and people begin to ask, was really a struggle for freedom? And is not freedom to be found in the, quote, white American dream? That is what the prosperity gospel represents. It is the direct opposite of Prophet Cherry, of Elijah Muhammad, of Martin Luther King. It assumes that Black people are free and all we need to do is think right. Think about money the right way. Think about getting ahead as individuals the right way. What our problem is not oppression. Our problem is that we don't think enough along capitalist lines. The God of money replaces the God of freedom and of beauty. When you properly understand Black art, before, let us say, Basquiat, and that kind of narrative, the Black artist represents the gods of freedom, the gods of beauty. In a lot of ways, the artist, the poet, the singer, the musician sees himself and herself as a representative of God on earth. They really do. They might not say it, but they do. The sacrifice of the painter could not be made unless she or he saw themselves as representing something way bigger than that. And they do. Alice and I went to the Missioner, is that the Missioner Museum to look at this exhibit of this great collection. A Black man who didn't grow up in Philly, but not far, suburban. And, you know, he came to understand the emptiness of his life growing up among white folk in the suburbs. And he discovers Black art, and for all of his life, he collects it, mainly Black Philadelphia artists. And this museum, and if you go to it, you see how dead it is. It really is. I mean, sadly so.
Where is it?
The Missioner, it's in Doylestown. That's in Bucks County. Well, I'll tell you. Right outside of Philly. But this exhibit took over a good part of the museum. And suddenly there was life, where previously there wasn't any. And I hope someday soon you'll be in such a museum, Serafina.
Yeah.
I really do. And I think, by the way, I was thinking about you yesterday, last night, and you know, you stand along Walter Edmonds and even Barbara and Michael Clemens, that this moment in the history of consciousness and the struggle to achieve God. Again, between 1880 and 1920, 20 million white people were brought into the country. Back then, there was no question of legal or illegal. Come on in, and we need you to prop up the white population. The dates are not insignificant. After the defeat of Reconstruction, to repopulate the nation with more white people. This population overwhelmingly came to cities or places where industry was building. This is the period where the United States had completed one part of its bourgeois revolution, thanks in no small measure to the 185,000 Black people that fought in the Union Army. To eliminate those numbers is to revise history towards a white supremacist understanding of American history. The 185,000 Black people and far more who operated as spies, who conducted, like Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad, which was not just a railroad, it was a rebellion against the slave system. Let us not forget. We call this chattel slavery, not just slavery, because Black people were owned as property. That is why it is very difficult to get Black people to, how would you say, look up to or value private property in the same way white folk do. It's not the same thing because we were property. The Underground Railroad was, quote, stealing property. A enslaved person that escaped could never be free because he or she was property. And that is, you may have heard of the Dred Scott decision of 1857. A Black man has no rights, a white man need respect. And that was not just a legal decision, that was a statement of fundamental values of a civilization. That persists up to this day. And what makes the immigration question so difficult qualitatively for Black people? Because so many immigrants come into this country, poor, uneducated, educated, and not poor, with the assumption that a Black person has no rights, that not even they need respect. And you don't have to articulate it, we know it from experience. This is a sad and tragic situation for Black folk and, of course, for the immigrant. Not as bad for the immigrant as it is, but it puts especially the more recent immigrants, but also the immigrants from the 1880s and so on, in a situation where they have to make a choice. To advance themselves, they have to look down on Black folk. That is an existential choice. It is a choice that people make knowingly. It's not that they don't know. Most overwhelmingly, immigrants choose whiteness. Now, I just wanted to say that certain things I left out last time. I just wanted to get, did I say? I made a mistake. I don't know how I made it. I said that the Black immigration from the South stopped in 1914 and began again after World War I. That is not true. There was something of an uptick of Black immigration from the South to the North, especially the Midwest, because of the shutoff of white labor coming from Europe because of the war in Europe. And so the immigration of Black folk to the North went forward. And I think we should understand that it's like everything, a lot of things that happen with Black people. It starts like a trickle, a few coming, and then more, and then more. It wasn't like, an out-and-out recruitment of Italians from Sicily or Irish from Ireland, open recruitment, come to the United States. For Black people, it was a small trickle that then became a stream, then became a river, and something like an ocean. And it lasted the first Great Migration, I estimate, lasted until 1930, which is the beginning of the Great Depression. The vast numbers of Europeans from Southern, Eastern, Central Europe, Central Europe is Prussia, parts of Czechoslovakia, Austria, and one of the advantages that they had in coming to the country is that European languages were already present here. Right. Although English was the mother tongue, there were German speakers, there were speakers who spoke in Gaelic languages, there were Czech speakers, German. So a German society could facilitate German workers, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't like a person coming from Japan or China, or even from parts of India, although I don't know that there were many coming at all, where the languages and civilizations are vastly different. The white migration ended around 1919, 1920. The blacks until about 1930, to be followed by a second Great Migration, which was more intentional on both sides, on the side of the employers and so on, and on the side of Black people. The first time around, it was, like almost escaping the South, what would happen to us type of thing, where would we live? So I just wanted to establish that kind of visual of how things kind of happen. Black people were coming from a backward economic situation and a very small town and rural and segregated, marginalized environment to the area of the country where the major productive and technological forces of industry were. You see what I'm saying? So you're going from a backward economy to an advanced economy. And they knew this. They understood this. Where you worked on a farm and now you work in a factory. But they easily adapted. And that was a measure of their consciousness. I wanted to say this. Serafina asked this last week, and part of when I talked, she said, well, what were the causes? I forget how you put it. And I said there were push and pull causes. Push being the situation in the South becomes intolerable. Here I'm thinking more about South Carolina. I think South Carolina is a special case. It is not the same as Mississippi. It's not the same as Arkansas, Tennessee, where the people come to the Midwest because there were train routes, there were bus routes going like that. The East Coast is where the train routes and the bus from South Carolina to Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, and so on. The push was the increasing impoverishment, the fact that the Southern economy was becoming more decadent, more backward, more oppressive, more impoverished, and that the Northern economy, the city, the urban economies were places of growth, economic growth. So they come from the most backward economic part of the country to the most advanced economic part of the country. I can't say how this affected them, how they went from one situation, like where my people are from, Greenwood, South Carolina, a very, very small city, all of the terror, all of the humiliation, and then be in Philadelphia. I don't really know how it affected them, what they thought, and so on. I do know that they were very tough people, very determined people. and people committed to make a better life. And they did feel that they had fought for freedom, they'd been betrayed, and now they would renew the fight for freedom. Freedom was never, ever cast aside. That was the driving force, and that's what separated them from everybody else. Oh, just one other thing, the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, we have that totally wrong. It was a gift from the French government to the American government on the occasion of the Declaration of Independence, 1776. It was delivered and dedicated in 1876. Its name, its original name, was not the Statue of Liberty. It was the mother, the mother of refugees, the mother, and it was dedicated on behalf of the freed slaves, not of immigrants coming from Europe. What's called the mother of youth. The name is so much more beautiful. The mother of exiles, the mother of exiles, I'm sorry, yes. And it was dedicated to the freeing of it was memorializing the freedom of the slaves. Ironically, it arrives right on the cusp of the defeat and overturning of Reconstruction. So the symbol of freedom arrives in the United States while freedom is being extinguished for Black people. So I just wanted to just think about all of that. We'll fill in the details, the empirical evidence. We'll go around and look at North Philly, get a sense of how it was peopled by Black people, and how ultimately a new urban culture is created in the United States. And that goes for Philly, you know Philadelphia better, but also Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. In a lot of ways, this is what August Wilson is memorializing in his 10-play cycle. People coming from the South. And, you know, and what is so frustrating sometimes is to see a production of an August Wilson play where the producers and the directors and the actors have no idea what August Wilson is talking about. You know, it's like, the hell with August Wilson, I'm going to do it the way I want to. And that was what our experience was the last time at Hardin. By the way, I'm not too happy is dealing with August Wilson these days. But anyway, I just want to move on, because I know to questions of the current crisis that are not unconnected to the questions of deindustrialization. First of all, I would like to indicate the factors, what we call the macro, global, and national factors that shape Philadelphia. Macro is I think, sociological or economic, in economic terms, where you talk about what we would call the totality, the whole. That is the macro. You hear people talk about macroeconomics. That means the whole economy. When you hear people talk about the gross domestic product, the national debt, they are drawing upon data and statistics from the whole economy. The opposite of macro is micro. The micro is concerned with the individual. Now, in sociology, we have introduced another concept called the meso level, M-E-S-O, the middle range of analysis. In economics, they deal mainly with the macro and micro. In sociology, we try to make clear that there are multiple levels of possible explanation and research. So, for example, you take the community of churches. An analysis, let's say of Philadelphia, of the Black church community, that in some ways could be argued is the study of the meso, the mid-level. It's not quite the whole, it's not just the individual. It is looking at a part of the whole, which is more than the individual. Just a kind of a footnote. If you look at most Black sociology, they are dealing with the whole community or subsets or parts of the whole. So when we look at Black folk, and this is very Du Boisian, he's looking at the whole community, which we could call the macro, the holistic, and at the mid-level. Seldom do we focus upon the individual. If you take Baldwin, the individual is looked at in relationship to the meso and the macro of Black people. And then, of course, Baldwin, the macro of the country. So I just wanted to say that. But there are, let me see, 1, 2, 5 areas that I think are necessary to understand what's going on. And unless we understand these, I think 5 areas, maybe more, but I think these 5 get taken off into some other things that don't help to understand what's going on. The first is deindustrialization. You cannot understand this country's economy. You cannot understand the poverty in this country, much of which is hidden poverty. You cannot understand the poverty of the white population, who never thought that they would see poverty again. After the Great Depression and the New Deal legislation, white folk thought that every generation would do better than the previous one. Suddenly, by the 2000s, every generation ain't doing better than the previous one, and succeeding generations are doing worse than their parents. A downward cycle. This can be traced back to deindustrialization. Some social analysts would say also technology. They put too much emphasis on technology because they want to make an argument that, well, poverty would be inevitable, even if we hadn't deindustrialized. No, it wouldn't. Deindustrialization is the major political, economic policy. We have been in one or another stage of deindustrialization for about 45 years now, and it is policy. The second is the cost or price of empire. You can't take this out, and it is connected to deindustrialization, as is neocolonialism. Well, China is probably the great example of the opposite trend. Most of Asia is in one or another way in the phase of neocolonialism. I think sometimes about India, and I talk about this a lot with Purba and Shantanu Sambarta. Why is India continuing to be on this path of compromise with the United States? Why? This huge country, great intelligentsia, all the potential in the world, and still you can't break with the West or the United States. Well, part of it is that to break with the West and the United States is really to build an economy that is not in part or in whole neo-colonialist.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I would make the argument that India is not a fully sovereign country.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions of its leaders have to take into account not just India, of Indian people, but the West, United States in particular. We've been going back and forth. I think that helps to explain it. India has not broken with neo-colonialism. Nowhere in Africa has there been a break with neo-colonialism. There were heroic efforts in the 60s, 70s, and maybe 80s, but they were all defeated through assassination and coup d'etat and ethnic civil wars and so on. This $37 trillion sovereign debt, when we say sovereign debt, we're talking about the federal government debt. This $37 trillion, which is predicted to rise to $50 trillion in 10 years, maybe less, is the cost of empire, not the cost of fighting poverty. It is the cost of empire. How do we know this? In part, we know it because of the dramatic rise in federal debt in the 2000s, the very period where the US decided to wage wars of regime change in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and to send a message to all other nations, Arab and non-Arab nations of what we call the Middle East, that if you go against the neo-colonial empire policies of the United States and the West, you will get what the Iraqis got, you will get what the Syrians, what the Afghans, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
A dramatic increase in sovereign debt, perhaps doubled since around 2000. You know, can you imagine? It was, no, it's maybe tripled, tripled. It was in the single digits.
Mm-hmm.
Even with, Vietnam and all these other wars and so on. It was only in the period of the permanent war, permanent regime change of the 2000s that we get this huge and dramatic increase in the sovereign debt. The debt. Now, help me with this, Sean, too.
Mm-hmm.
If the U.S. gross domestic product is $23 trillion and the debt is $37 trillion,
Okay.
isn't the debt 1.5 times or something like that of the GDP?
Yeah.
And I keep saying they put these figures, the same figures that I'm saying, and they say, well, it's 1.25. No, it's 1.5. In other words,
Oh, yeah.
the debt is 150 times larger than the economy, all the goods and services produced in the economy. The debt is rising much faster than the growth in the economy. The debt ultimately will weigh down the economy. But the other thing is that this magnitude of debt will devalue the US dollar, which is central to the US empire and the US global economic reach. If other nations don't want the dollar, but even worse than that, don't want to fund the US debt, for every kind of reason that I don't know, and I guess we can just imagine, the US dollar diminishes. is devalued, which also means that domestic inflation increases. So when King said war is the enemy of the poor, war spending is the enemy of the poor, in ways that I don't think he could even imagine. At this point, the annual interest on the sovereign debt is more than military spending. Now, the interest payment, what the US government pays to people who hold bonds and to whom we owe money, the interest is more than is spent on the military. I mean, at a certain level, it makes sense for Trump, even though in most instances he don't make no sense. But a broke clock is right twice a day. He is right. The United States cannot afford empire. The British couldn't afford empire. Okay? And that's why they had to retreat from India. A prolonged struggle with India would have taken the British Empire down even faster. They had to reach a compromise with Gandhi and the freedom movement. Third, political crisis. This is not only a political crisis. There's a crisis of legitimacy. It's a crisis that could possibly undo the whole American political system. By the political system, I'm talking about the system of governance, which increasingly raises the question, can the nation be governed under these conditions? Political violence is on the rise. I'm not just talking about these young kids in West Philly shooting up a playground. That's not political violence. I'm talking about people like we see the Magionis and many others who carry out murders of high-profile executives and representatives of the financial ruling elite. No one of them is safe these days, and they know it. The rise of political violence is perhaps the most dramatic indicator of the depth and almost irreversibility of the crisis of legitimacy. In other words, the regime does not rule with the support of the people, 75% of whom say that the American system does not work for them. This is a dramatic decline from, let us say, 2000, 25 years ago, where the majority of Americans said that the system more or less worked for them. I think if you go to India, if you go to South Africa, where there is a crisis of legitimacy, these figures could not be replicated. The United States is in a unique position in the world today in terms of the crisis of legitimacy. The fourth, the moral and civilizational crisis. You see, part of it is a kind of reading of, interpretation of the Anglo-Saxon predisposition towards individual freedom. Let me, if I might, just, in a parenthetical way, this, the Anglo-Saxon, that is John Locke, Edmund Burke, then Jefferson, and all of the people that come out of the English-speaking world, as it were, said that if you free the individual will free society, or the aggregate of individuals who are free would represent a free society. I don't know that any civilization has ever gone to this extreme. Most would say that the individual is free to the extent that you create a free society. We do it in reverse. Well, I would say the American value system. This has meant in the postmodern moment that you emphasize individual rights, individual freedoms, irrespective of what those rights or freedoms mean to society as a whole. This is where you get this irrational, just romanticization of owning guns. Like a gun will make you free. But at the, and you know something? Let's look at it, because this is a moral civilizational question. White people love guns more than any people in human history. Why? Why do y'all love guns so much? The Chinese don't. Most European nations don't, but they love guns. Well, it goes back to the quote, fear of Black people.
Yeah.
Let's keep it 100. It's not an innocent love of guns. And in this respect, even though we wish as much as possible to give a benefit of the doubt to those white people who wish to do the right thing, the fact of the matter is there's a culture, a morality that in its essence is immoral. Everybody got to have a gun, including a tank if you can afford one, and all of this. The love, and the gun is a representative of power. But this goes with everything, with culture. How do you unleash gangster rap on Black young children? Who would do that unless you ate Black children? You know what the consequences would be after one generation, not to mention 2 or 3. The values promoted in rap, I don't care, even if it is underground. Underground, but does not criticize the excesses and the violence of rap, the misogyny of rap. If you don't criticize that, why are you underground? You may as well get paid too, if you understand where I'm coming from. And that's a point of reckoning that we Black people are gonna have to come to grips with going forward. But this extreme individualism, be it with regards to guns, be it with regards to trans sexuality, especially for children, how does that free a child to say you make the decision about whether or not you're going to take the hormones and get the operation? How can you make the decision? Society, what is the point of parenthood anyway? If a 13-year-old will decide. And I know people who, I know people who have said to me, my 10-year-old son is transgendered woman. When I was, it was so shocking to hear, so really frightening. What becomes of that child by you abdicating responsibility? Of course, responsibility carries a lot with it. You could be wrong. Whenever we take responsibility for an act, for a moral stance or whatever, we also have to be humbled by the fact that you can make a mistake. But somebody got to be responsible for something. Everything can't be left to the individual. The moral and civilizational crisis of this society, we cannot escape it. And then finally, the crisis of knowledge, science, and ideology. These 5 areas. help to contextualize the current crisis and the future abyss. And it is in this context that there, well, 2 articles and 1 podcast that I'd like to emphasize. And I'm going to go fast. I know I'm talking. First, Alex Grainer. I think some of us look at his podcast or look at him on podcasts. And he has become in the last year very famous as a podcaster. Alex Grainer, he's a European. He speaks, I guess, as part of his charisma to speak like a European. And he's a hedge fund. I don't know what his whole resume is, but nothing related to struggle. Alex Grainer is more or less a follower of Lyndon LaRouche.
Okay.
And we have to know that to understand what he's talking about. For example, the LaRoucheites have always claimed that the British Empire, and to which people are like, well, what British Empire? But the British Empire is running the world, and the United States is just the policeman or the sheriff, the muscle, the military. In other words, the British Empire has run the world since the Opium Wars of the 1840s and the colonization of Asia and Africa. They still run the world. That is the LaRouche position. Alex Grainer, I think, has swallowed hook, line, and sinker whatever Trump does. In some ways, he sounds like Scott Ritter when leading up to the attack on Iran. Remember Scott Ritter, who was at one time proclaiming that that Trump is a revolutionary and Iran need to do what Trump tells them to do because this revolution is going to be taken forward. Does anybody remember that? I mean, he looked like a fool. I don't even know how he shows himself on podcasts these days. But Alex Grainer has a similar stance that Trump, in spite of all of his bombast and foolishness, is in fact carrying out an anti-British Empire strategy. In other words, the British control all of the major processes in the world, and to oppose their policies is to oppose empire. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
This way of explaining Trump, and then say, by the way, he also says that Trump is trying to save his life. That if he came out and said really what he was trying to do, he could be killed. Okay. Well, he could be killed even before that or without that. So therefore, he has to conceal his real intentions in all types of misdirecting narratives. He wants peace with Russia, but he's going to send nuclear-armed submarines off the coast of Russia. He wants peace with Iran, but he's going to bomb Iran. Oh, he had to do that, and he really didn't do it. He only partially did it. You know, did it ever occur to Grainer that maybe he ran out of bombs? You know, because they gave so much to Israel and Ukraine. You know, but I think we have to understand now. Grainer, as so many of them, is not. These are smart people. These are people who have access to information that we don't normally have access to. How they get it, that's another question. But then there's Douglas McGregor, retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, and David Brooks. I think Emily sent the essay, McGregor essay, along with the email about the. I think so, but you could get it's an essay by Douglas McGregor entitled "Versailles on the Potomac."
Mm-hmm.
Versailles is a reference to the center of French power, Versailles Castle, during the period before the French Revolution. And then he says the United States looks to be on the verge of something similar to 1789 in France. 1789 was when the French people rose up and brought the monarchy down and executed the representatives of it, including, I think, King Louis XIV, his wife, Antoinette, and others. It was the most thoroughgoing and bloody of the bourgeois revolutions. It follows by 13 years, the American Revolution. These are the most thoroughgoing of the bourgeois democratic revolutions.
What do you mean by thoroughgoing?
The most complete, in the Serafina, in the bourgeois sense. In other words, a new class comes to power, takes over the state, and by controlling state power, can control the economy and help to forge a new set of economic relations based upon capitalism. When I use the word bourgeois, I'm talking about the capitalist class. I'm not talking about being bougie. I'm talking about the capitalist class. What Douglas McGregor says, the crisis of the United States is so deep, unless something very drastic is done, we are looking at a repeat of 1789, what happened in Paris. In other words, an uprising of the people that will end with the death of many members of the ruling elite. That's what he is talking about. He bases that upon his assessment of the objective factors of the crisis, many of which we have mentioned here, but also the depth of the anger of the American people. We have gone through this so much, the data, the statistics, what, huge parts of the American population are saying about the government, how they think the government has to be overturned, 25% saying they're not against violence, and so on. Douglas McGregor knows what he's talking about, I think. He says, he points to some, he doesn't talk about deindustrialization, but he does talk about the unhappiness of the American people. David Brooks, who is I think, an insightful observer of the ruling elite and its relationship to the people. And that's the key. If the ruling elite is not accepted by the people, it can't rule. See what I'm saying? Unless they wish to establish a dictatorship of the ruling elite, which they're not beyond, of course. David Brooks, and I won't read the article, is saying basically that the crisis is civilizational. We can also frame it the way Martin Luther King did, a moral crisis. King would often cite the Unitarian preacher, Theodore Parker, who made the statement, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends to justice. But that's the moral universe. But if the arc of the moral universe goes in one direction and the ruling class is going in an opposite direction, you're then faced with an irreversible clash, a conflict. Well, I just want to end there. I think this provides us, or at least I'm trying to provide us with a way of approaching this crisis. This is a crisis that cannot be resolved by interminable marches. March for everything, march against everything, without any purpose, without any direction. It won't be resolved through the attempts of the so-called communist parties. I think we're up to about 8 now. Returning to the glory days of the world communist movement. It's not going to happen that way. The best hand is the model developed by the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, where you combine moral questions with questions of democracy, of questions of poverty, of questions of war. That the overall context of a movement and discourse about the future begins with the moral imperative. What is the right thing to do? Not what is the thing to do to make money. Not what is the thing to do to stabilize an unstable system. What is the moral question that confronts the American people? And from that, a movement, not of elites telling the people, but the people based upon their own capacity to understand right and wrong. And by right and wrong, we're talking about what's good for the children. Start there. If war is bad for children, then why are you going to do it? Why not find a way to peace? The moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative. The idea, the methodology that says that the revolutionaries should calculate based upon the class conflict, which itself supersedes any concerns of the life world of people, of what people begin with. And this is part of this crisis of legitimacy. The sense that the ruling class is without moral foundation, that they are immoral. And this is why this Jeffrey Epstein thing is so important. And I don't care what the polls show right now. This is cutting deep. Because it says what many people already know, that the ruling elite have no moral boundaries. And if they don't, how can they claim to lead the people? The moral question comes to the fore. I just want to say that. And as we in the free school continue to do our work and try to perfect, to do better what we've been doing, we have every right to say to all sides, especially the ruling class, which I don't think is worth even, they're not even worth talking to for the most part. I don't even know what to say to such people. Trump? Come on, man, start with telling the truth once in a while.
One time.
Start with shutting your mouth. Start with humility. You know, like the Bible say, I don't know whether it's in the Bible, I know black Christians say, be still and know you are not God. excuse my language, bitch. You are not God. But see, that's the white thing. I'm sorry, I'm talking to see this idea that we're gonna be God. We can do it through AI. We get AI right, we control all y'all, which makes me God. And that's the way they talk. Or you take string theory, or you take, and I'm gonna say, the Jews have a lot to reckon with. They didn't just get to this point on October 7th. This is an evolving consciousness because they are deciding and doing things based upon the assumption that they are God. When they say they are the chosen people, in a certain chosen by God, they are acting as though they are God. Now let's keep it 100. There are only 16 million Jews on the whole world, planet of 8 billion. Well, they got the backup of an amoral, immoral, evil government. See, this is why when Alex Greiner and those, or Scott Ritter, or even a Steve Bannon, these are people we've talked about, I'll explain them to you, say that Trump is a revolutionary. Their definition of a revolutionary doesn't fit anyone that has been a revolutionary in history. Trump could have made a contribution in his conflicted way by retreating from war, which he said in his campaign, I would be a candidate of peace. And you have been the opposite of that. I could say more, but I'll stop there.
I could say about the Lushites, because they were part of the Students for a Democratic Society.
Say that one more time.
Can I just talk about the LaRouche people?
Oh, the Rouge, yeah.
And just add some my thoughts. And I just spoke for a long time, but there's so much to respond to. But so they were part of Students for a Democratic Society, and LaRouche had that organization, the Labor Board or something.
National Caucus of Labor Committees. This is back in the early 70s. Let me just say something. This is very important to if you don't mind, I don't want to interrupt you, but this is very important to understanding the neocons. The neocons were all, or most of the majority of them, were Trotskyites back in the 1950s and 60s. Not insignificant, because then they became advocates and so on, or planners and so on, of the American warfare state. They went from the theory of permanent revolution to take it to mean permanent war. LaRouche and those start out as Trotskyites. A kind of a unique brand, unique in a sense they were, but I just wanted to say that because then their evolution to this pro-imperialist, pro-American imperialist stance under the guise that they're fighting against the empire, which is the British. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give me some.
No, because I want to talk about that because I don't want to get too distracted, but this is my personal interest of all those revolutionaries who came out of SDS and their development as revolutionaries in their older age. And they, along with Eldridge Cleaver, they start off very, fight the imperialists, any means necessary, go underground. And that becomes the most advanced elements of the SDS along with the LaRouchites.
The LaRouchites were not an advanced element.
Out of SDS.
No, not at all. They were not an advanced, they were, if I could just, if you don't mind, see, the Students for Democratic Society was a great movement of students who supported the civil rights movement and opposed the war in Vietnam. That's the early 60s. And they were on campuses. They were probably, like 99% white students, but they fought for democracy, broad student movement. But as the movement and the student movement against the war in Vietnam, students going to the South who were members of SDS to support the voting rights in the South, then these small groups of so-called revolutionaries infiltrated to take it over. And the LaRoucheites were part of this architecture, of all of these groups fighting to get leadership of something that they had nothing to do with building. And that's why they then, LaRouche and them, called themselves a caucus within SDS, but a caucus of labor committees. In other words, they tried to hide their hand behind this idea that they're trying to make SDS a more labor-oriented thing. But that was only a front to achieve power, or else to take away from SDS or to recruit from within SDS people that would join their thing.
So I'm very familiar with this because I did this in the Revolutionary Student Coordinating Committee. So back at Temple. So I'm very familiar with the move, exactly what you're saying, of entryism into a larger mass organization to pull people to perform, what Trotskyite or a Maoist. It's an ultra a Maoist thing to go into unite the advance, just wait backward.
Put inverted quotes around this advance.
It's not just, so as a personal interest, I'm interested in these ultra-left tendencies and what happens to these revolutionaries when they become older, the long arc of their life. And take, for instance, the Weathermen, when they're in their older, advanced age.
The Weathermen were one of the factions within SDS.
So not the advanced, sorry, that was the old me coming out. Yeah. The ultra-leftist tendencies. So you used to get my language now.
No.
But I wanted to say about the LaRouche tendency that they are critical of the U.S. Anglo-American banking system, and we might draw, not just, I know you guys think I'm all about Haas, I don't know why you guys think that. I'm more interested in Matthew Earhart and Samira Khan, and I've never heard of this Alex Craner, but LaRouche has had a reflourishing, a renaissance of his ideas recently in the leftist subculture, and I wanted to say something about subculture too. We talked about gangster rap, but the weakness, however, and you can see it when you engage with the LaRouche tendency, is that they might be pro the multipolar world, but they never talk about the darker world, or Du Bois like we do. In fact, if you listen to a LaRouche person, or someone with LaRouche tendency on Cuba, they're very anti-Cuba. And this is because they don't see the rise of the darker nations like us.
Well, I would say, if we can, I think I would not be as generous as you. I'll tell you the truth, Samir. I think they're cold-blooded white supremacists.
Yeah.
I don't think they're two sides. They're white supremacists. They're white people who think they're the smartest people in the world, and that they set up their little think tank, and they're, yada, yada, yada. But it's interesting that they're doing the same thing with the MAGA movement and the Republican Party that they did with SDS. They're always into that. And but I just want to say this because, I had a lot of direct personal experience with them.
I know.
And this is something that you will never experience, and I always try to make you all aware of it. We believe in the power of ideas and in the power of people. They don't. And there are people who will take violent means to silence people like us. That's what I experienced with that, with the LaRouchites. We were not a member, we were not part of SDS. I wasn't a part of SDS. So why are you coming at us, who are young students and that type of thing? Well, it is something like the Move family, to carry out dramatic actions to draw attention to yourself, especially in the media. And that's what they're doing. And now they've cleaned up their image, and they have, but I see, you can attack finance capital, so-called, while being financed by finance capital, as a distraction, as a disruption. That's the way I would put it. You know, I don't think, if you would have asked me, that's why when I saw Alex Greiner, I kind of picked it up as I was hearing him speak over time, that he was connected to these people. I then knew that this is a guy, very little of what he says can be taken seriously. Or you have to, or at least you have to understand this other part of him to understand what he is saying.
No, it's like the weathermen, and
Yes.
this goes back to my personal experience, because I'm young, I'm in the left, I'm looking up to Move, I'm looking up to STS. I'm asking the question, you don't need to know, you don't need to have a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
Yes. Yeah, weatherman, that's from a song by Bob Dylan.
And, but then I'm looking at their lives in the aria, and I'm looking at their lives. It's in Germany, Red Army back.
Oh yeah.
And I'm looking at their live. What's his name? The guy in Chicago working with Obama. Bill Ayers. And being a professor, and then I'm looking up, all the Black Panthers being silent, stop getting professorships. What's happening to Africology, and them not saying anything about it. But I know you know better. I know you were in my position. So I'm curious. And same thing with Eldridge Cleaver. What happens when you? I'm personally very interested in the long arc of revolutionaries' life, and that moral choice, but over the long period of time. And that reminds me of what you said about the moral choice, because a lot of people will talk. They'll disguise the question of, I can't be a revolutionary because I have a family to take care of, or my family depends on me. But then you look at the sacrifice of people who have faced the Zionists, and they're saying, "Oh, we'll kill your entire family." Or like, this came up in preschool a long time ago with King, because his sister and mother were killed as well, and it brings the moral question to me, like, I have a family too. I love my family. Doesn't everybody love their family? Well,
Can I just say this? Everybody will not and should not be asked to make the same sacrifice. And they shouldn't. And if a person says to me, look, I can't do this, I can do that because I have to take care of my family. Yes, I can dig that. That's the importance of collectivity, where everybody doesn't have to do the same thing. But, everybody can't be Martin Luther King, just can't. I mean, even if they wanted to be. So you get like the Weather Underground that you mentioned. And suddenly, and the thing that's so important to understand is the social context out of which all this comes. First of all, the great Black freedom movement. And so you going, and then the great peace movement, which is inseparable from the Black civil rights movement, So now you're going to come, Martin Luther King was a assimilationist and not a revolutionary. You're going to be the revolutionary. To which and see, this is where the question of where do white people get the moral authority, first of all, to make a judgment like that about Martin Luther King and Black folks, Where do you come from? What is your history? And this, it always grades against me. It's an arrogance. That's where you get the weather underground. Yeah, a lot of them were stupid and dumb and blew themselves up trying to make bombs. You know, they felt like, you know, like you and others like you, oh, our way to being a revolutionary is to express solidarity with the MOVE organization. You know, that's all I have to do. It is a moral abdication. Is that all you have to do? Is it that simple? Is it that easy? Find a, quote, Black organization, you know what I'm saying? Or find the Palestinians. And they become your virtue signaling mechanism. Oh, I'm down with the Palestinians, don't say nothing to me. Or in the identity politics, oh, I'm down with the trans people, don't ask, you know, but it all is a fig leaf where you don't have to do what you really need to do and purge yourself of all of the white supremacy while you carry out revolutionary activity. That's that critical, self-critical thing. But no, you're going to poach or appropriate the Black movement and then say, you say, oh, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm down with Elbridge Cleave and the Black Panther Party. That don't make it you are anti-racist or anti-white supremacist, if you understand where I'm coming from. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Can I ask, because the point about the deindustrialization.
By the way, that ultra-left move is always a way to say you're revolutionary without fighting white supremacy. Always. Oh, and you'll find that you'll see it over and over and over again. I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, I was kind of on a different wave anyway, because I was thinking about what you had said about the deindustrialization for the past 45 years. And, you know, all the move or the push from.
The push-pull.
Well, I'm trying to not jump ahead because I'm moving too quickly, but how the city is pushing Black people up into the Northeast and the top of the Northeast, whether that be like.
It didn't push Black people up into the Northeast.
No. I'm bringing up that how that had something else up in my mind.
Go ahead.
There is no manufacturing in North Central, like as it exists today.
It's been, that's right,
Right.
heavily did.
And so gentrification is pushing Black people and poor people in different
That's right.
parts
Absolutely.
of the,
Absolutely.
you know, Philadelphia region, like Northeast. Or like,
Yes.
for example, there's that project with the train, the Roosevelt, up to Roosevelt Boulevard. And it's like, well, why is there a need for a train or whatever?
This is a new wave of gentrification.
Right. And
I think that has more to do with Bucks County.
okay.
But good, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I mean, I did,
No.
yeah, but anyway.
No.
But what's interesting about that phenomena is like, there's no major base for work unless it's like either delivery services, Postmate, like where do people work if they're also being pushed outside of a city that also doesn't have any manufacturing base anymore? And also, where do people work inside the city that doesn't have
That's very important.
that hasn't, in North Philly, like we were talking about and that we're going to look deeper into, it's also grown out of a life world of people that the churches, the work. And so where does the organization of the people happen? So that came into my mind as it exists, you know.
Yes.
But then the other thing that was running in my head is that point about the debt, because
Before you get there,
Well, I know.
No, hold that point.
Yeah.
See, I think this point of how do you organize and what are the mechanisms through which the ideological struggle is waged. And the question of how you organize is a big question, and you can't just approach it, or you do this, you do that. We have not yet found, and the people have not yet found, the new ways that we must organize for the very reason that you have given.
In the midst of a crisis.
The attack upon the Black social system, weakening it, the crisis of youth, etc. But we do have a sense of some of the mechanisms of the ideological struggle. This is why I put a high
On the moral.
the moral, but the moral as expressed through art.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And music. We do know, I think we have that right. Now, how that manifests in movements and organizations is another question. How you go from one to the other is very difficult. I don't have the answer, but I just wanted to say that.
People talk.
And but one other thing, you are absolutely right. When you ask the question, where are people working? Where are they living?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? These are important questions because Black folk don't all live where we used to live.
But what's interesting though is like you had said between the sharecropping to the manufacturing.
Yes.
Black people have also lived where they work.
Yeah.
So how do you?
That's North Philly. That's
How
right.
do you relocate a people without having that connection to work?
This is very important, Sarah. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's kind of connected only because it asks a question. I'm asking. Well, with the debt situation.
Have you exhausted that first situation?
No.
But say a little bit more about that. We don't give that up yet.
Well, wait. I follow you, but I also want to just mention what I was thinking about. And then,
Because see,
okay.
you know, what you're doing, at least in the questions you're asking, is that you're doing the initial work of sociology. You're asking the right questions, researchable questions. You know what I'm saying? Out of which we can come up with hypotheses and then which is right, which is not. But I think the questions, don't go too quickly past those questions that you're asking, because that in itself is fundamental to finding answers. Everyone is not asking these questions, Sarah. They're not asking these questions. So the questions are the first step towards an explanation. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
But I want you to keep on that, because you said, where are they living? Where are the factories? Where are they working? You asked about the extension of SEPTA up to the Northeast. And is that pushing Black people up there? And then for them to have public transportation to come and work at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania Hospital, Temple University.
No, I was then also thinking about the universities or how they work at the universities, but
you go ahead. I knew you were going to ask about the debt. I interrupted you.
No,
forgive me.
because that's like on the other side of the fence, you know, because with debt, as you were laying out with the 150 whatever percent, is it a percent times larger than the economy? Then that question is like, well, how's the state kept together under a debt? And like I also listen, Samir, he listens to different stuff. I also listen to Tucker Carlson. And like there was like that interview, I forget the name, but they were talking about like how or Charlie Kirk, I don't know.
Yes.
And the radicalizing young America or whatever, and they're talking. I think they're only talking about white young America, or like
Pretty
maybe
much, yeah.
the MAGA movement.
Their imaginary does not go beyond white people.
Right.
That's a hell of a thing, isn't
And
it?
but that also relates to what you said about why the white, like what you're saying about the white imaginary,
Yes.
and why they want to be white and to keep whiteness kind of alive or like intact. But I feel like that is also moral in a way,
Yes.
and that is also something that keeps the state intact too.
Well, it
right?
does. It does. I think, again, I appreciate you putting these questions in front of us and the way you do it. I think you're absolutely right. You get these people who are part of the Trump movement who talk about the dead. Oh, God, I'm sorry.
No, because the other aspect is like the reason why they voted for Trump is not only because of the war, but that he would change the state so that because the whole what you're bringing up about the Rushites and like the British Empire and also the American government is also how that echelon, or I don't know how to say if it's just the white elite or this country think of themselves, even up to this day. And so if Trump is supposed to change the state or rupture the state in a certain way, then there was a certain hope about what America could have become for white people specifically, or I don't even know if the New Deal, like you can't compare it to like something like the New Deal because it's not a all people's program, but it's specifically a revolution of the state. Like that's what they hoped for Trump. But like
that's right, and that's what he promised.
Right, but he's not also doing that.
No.
So then how does?
I don't know.
Right.
See, that's the crisis.
Yeah.
The political crisis of this moment, the immediate political crisis of he having been elected, saying one thing, and then as soon as he gets in there, he does the complete opposite. And then, of course, the moral question.
I just don't understand how it's kept together.
Well, it's not, this is the issue. And this is what David Brooks and Colonel McGregor are pointing to. That's when he talks about, see, and they don't see things the way we do. Of course, McGregor, he sees 1789, and he's pretty much as the collapse of the old regime, of the regime, of the monarchy, of the feudal lords, of the merchants and bankers. That collapsed. You know what I'm saying? And he also connects it to this huge unpayable debt where the state is bankrupt, where it cannot pay its creditors. That's where we're going. And so how will all of this affect the daily lives of people?
Right.
We can't be just too general about it. Our concern is, first and foremost, how will it affect Black people? It's because we see Black people as the potential galvanizing force to change the society, not just to destroy the society, but to transform the society. We think and for all the reasons, I'm not going to go through, but how all of this will be actualized in practice, we don't know. We do know what we can do, like your art is so very important. I know you don't want me to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. In fact, I was so moved by your exhibit last night. The work of artists, and this becomes the work of intellectuals. By intellectuals, I'm not talking about nobody teaching at Harvard. I consider them to be the lowest of the low, bums and assholes. The intellectual that emerges from the people, that intellectual who educates himself or herself, who is so in love with humanity that person fights for the truth. no matter what the price is. That is what we're hoping to give birth to,
Yeah.
to give life to. You know what I'm saying? And then the more people that kind of think like us, are like us in the way they approach the world, the more people that will be a part of a large discussion of where do we go from here? Chaos or community, you know, Martin Luther King. Where do we go from here? And that's going to be the difficult one. Oh, I'm so good.
I have a question. New York, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia. It seems to me, I don't know, but it seems to me in those major cities, the universities are responsible for gentrification.
No
Why do you
question.
think?
Well, see, this is why the study of North Philly is going to be so important. Because unlike West Philly, North Philly has been waging a multi-decade struggle against Temple's gentrification. We have not been able to stop it. We've slowed it down in some ways. But because the university is connected to the state and the government, they operate not just on their own, but with the power and force, both financially and otherwise, of the state. So Black people have a case to be made. Why are we paying taxes to a government that supports institutions that uproot our communities? This is the hard question. And, you know, by the way, don't think Black people are not asking this every day as they think, as they're on the bus going to work, as they go to church. Why am I paying taxes to a government? Go ahead, Jim.
To be uprooted.
That's right. And by the way, this gentrification is not just we're going to move, it's to destroy the foundation of your culture, of your social system, to weaken you as a people. And then to come back to you and say, oh, we're celebrating you. I don't feel celebrated, as I've said before. I don't feel that you celebrate. I feel that you have distorted this great history.
Because just like Los Angeles, the 10 freeway was in the Black area. And in 1963, they uprooted that whole community. They put the freeway in the community that became under the guise of eminent domain.
Eminent domain.
And those people, they were paid nothing for their property. I think they were giving them like $10,000, which was unbelievable. And now, University of Southern California, it's called Jefferson Park. And in the cluster of Jefferson Park were very upward mobile Black areas. The one was called Sugar Hill, and those that became area in the 1950s. They were domestic workers for the Hollywood industry, and they were able to buy big, spacious houses in that area, the Jefferson area. And as of 2010, that whole area is 6% white.
Is what?
60% white. And all our, neighborhoods are uprooted, usually financed by the banks and the university. They're saying it's to better the neighborhood or to get more people to come to the university to feel safe. And they made a shopping center. They created a shopping center in 79, 80, somewhere around there. for the students at USC. And now it's abandoned. Now it's abandoned. So my question is, as a group of people, what is our responsibility to stop that from happening?
This is, if I, oh, good. If you ask, I mean, somebody else could say something, but let me tell you something. The crisis, this is what studying Black people is the key to the understanding of the entire situation. Overwhelmingly, all of this has happened to Black communities. You know, you talk about LA, I talk about North Philly or West Philly, somebody else talk about the South Side of Chicago, or the Hill District in Pittsburgh. You understand? But it's repeated over. And what this does, the little wealth that Black people, by buying a house, were able to accumulate and pass on to the younger generation is eliminated. Not to mention the cultural holocaust, but it's all Black people. That is what, you know, a lot of people, if you don't mind saying, want this general theory of the working class. It's BS. Because intentional or not, it is a way of eliminating or erasing what happened to Black people, which explains the general pattern of urbanization, of urban renewal, and all of that, which is in Black communities. I don't care whether it's building a highway or whatever. John, I don't know. I don't know the answer. And we're seeking for an answer. I don't know. But there will have to be, and this is why the cities will be very important. Because this is where the wealth is concentrated. This is where these universities are. This is where the real estate is most valuable, all of it. And this is where Black folk are. How this struggle will unfold is, we don't yet know.
But to me, I think the culprit is the universities and the banks.
Say that one more time.
The universities and the banks are the culprit.
Oh, no question. There is no two way. You got it exactly right. The universities and the banks. And wherever you see these great universities, or the other thing, or this, what they call this Silicon Valley type of thing, it's always connected with banks that exist not to serve the community, but to serve the university or the tech industry. Banks set up specifically. They don't loan money. If an ordinary person came and said, I'd like to rehab my house, I'd like to buy a house, you go to the bank. No, we don't loan to y'all. We loan to the university. We're, you know, so yes. And I would just say one other thing. The way banks are no longer banks the way they used to be chartered and where they used to be thought of, where banks today exist not to serve communities, to invest in a community, to help people buy homes. Of course, it was discriminatory against Blacks, but that's what we fought against. But today, banks are more hedge funds, investment funds, and they exist or are connected at the hip to either universities or tech firms or that type of thing. I don't think it's a sustainable system. Now, a lot of, you know, leftists and radical commentators, they predict that the system is on the cusp of collapsing. Well, it could be, but it don't have to be, because it will require people to transform it.
Well, well, I guess what I wanted to, because I think with these commentators, there's always this question or this impending collapse, but then there's also not the question of what comes after for the people.
Yeah.
And I mean, John, I think is also asking this question, which is what happens for the people.
Yeah.
And I sort of see our study of poverty and deindustrialization as a study of who the people are and what is their capacity to reconstruct and build anew of a nation. And I don't think that's a question that's present because I'm very grateful to you and Samir in explaining Alex Rayner as well and the LaRouche, because when I was reading, when I was watching or listening to it, I was so confused because he kept bringing up the British Empire, and I was like, "Are you talking about the 1920s, or are you talking about right now?" And he was talking about right now, which is the British Empire, because it's also the whole thing of Russiagate and the U.S. politics and how it's created by the UK. And I was just so confused because he, at the same time, he also admits that economically and financially, socially, Europe and the UK are in collapse. And so how is it an empire? But, and then he also gives so much credit to Trump, which is essentially that Trump, he's this great, like, actually we should believe him because maybe he has ulterior reasons that we don't know.
And he's a great strategist.
Yeah.
And he's thinking way beyond everybody else.
Yeah, and so essentially the movement or the masses that had voted him into power, they don't need to know like what he's doing or what his objective is. Just trust him. And that's the thing, which is like, how do you, or the thing is that from preschool we're always saying, which is how do we know the people to be responsible to the people, and actually that you aren't smarter than the people. And I think that Alex Rayner thing was so confusing to me, first and foremost. But for the Douglas McGregor one of Versailles on the Potomac, I was actually quite impressed by some of the language that he uses as well, which is, for example, he said the moral fabric of those in power is in question, a deep distrust by the American people, and the uncertainty. But the piece, and then how he sees the situation to the time of France and both a decadent ruling elite that was also in debt. But then this thing is, I don't really fully understand it, which is, it said that he was arguing that the debt of France came from supporting the American Revolution. But the part that kind of falls short is also where Free School also is trying to explore, is that Douglas McGregor actually is, I don't know, I think he's hesitant about the American people because he doesn't see Black folk. He makes this generalization of Americans, which is that their conscious has actually not been so developed, that they're unaware of the ruling elite and they're unaware of what's happening in the world. Like, he makes this broad generalization. But what we've constantly been saying in Free School is that actually, if you look at America, there's two social systems, and actually the Black social system is the one that has been aware of the ruling elite and those in power, and has been also aware of the world and its changes. But I guess I say that to say, I think our recent Free School discussions have just revealed how many questions we have as Free School, which is of where are the people at? And because if there is going to be any renewal or transformation, it will have to come from the masses of the people believing in the moral arc of the universe. And also there's just this because recently we read King as well, which is that how do you actually have conversations, like even before you have a program or a movement, it has to be built upon ideas and a basis of unity of the people, which at this current moment we're uncertain about, which is where are people? Are they talking to each other? What are the questions that they're asking? But even just to go back to the initial point, which is that our poverty of, really, we say poverty and deindustrialization because these have been huge forces on the people and of Black folk in this country. Like, how, I know like many of us have driven through like various parts of Philly, and I guess like a scene that has stuck in my mind over the past couple of days it's just like seeing children in North Philadelphia,
Seeing what?
children
Yes.
in North Philadelphia, places where, there's trash all over the place, there's collapsed buildings. What happens to a generation where that is, or generations where that is what people grow up in? But at the same time, I think we're also looking for the spirit in which also I think various individuals of the free school have also seen examples of such strong Black folk. And sometimes that's kind of our anchor or North Star. But this is actually something Emily had said earlier in the week, which is that part of the task of free school is to give oxygen to the people so that there can be revolutionaries or movements of the people. But anyway, I'll end there.
I was gonna say, similar what Alice was saying about being able to assess that. Actually hearing even what John, you're saying about, essentially, John, you're proposing a new general theory, which is like, why is it that you can have 20 diverse cities across the US, Northeast, South, or even in the West, but then there's a general theory, which is always gentrification of Black folk is always around universities. It's like a new general theory, right? And for all the like theoreticians in the US, it's like no one, there are some papers and stuff about that, but no one wants to identify the reason enough to stop it. And there's a reason for that. Because actually, I was thinking about Nashville, where when we were visiting Fisk, like there was this street called Jefferson Street, which is where all the Black music spots were. And it was part of the circuit of Southern, like where all the musicians would go in the South. Like they would play in these black clubs and places and like Jefferson Street was known for like where Jimi Hendrix like first got started or something. But then Jefferson Street today is gentrified and it's right near Fisk and I forget the names. It's called like Tennessee A&M now, and where I think Oprah went to school there. It's like all these HCPUs, Mahaffey, I think Meharry, the medical, like the Black Medical Institute is there. All these, and they were all central to the student sit-in movement. And it's almost actually, when you think about it, Jefferson Street, which produced a lot of revenue even, because it was Black music, and Nashville was not known as a country music city. It was known as actually a Black music city, right? The narrative has switched. And the reason why it's a white music city now is because an interstate was built over Jefferson Street. And actually, if you go there, because my sister lives in Nashville, when you drive through there, it's actually really disgusting because the interstate got built. Everyone said there's no reason for an interstate to be built over a highly prosperous commercial corridor. Who does that, right? You would never see that. But the reason why is because it happened immediately in the decade after the sit-in movement. And in fact, you could actually connect it to this revenge. It was a revenge on this is what happens when you allow these HBCUs to all congregate together, all these young, educated, searching individuals. And so you even create an interstate that divides the HBCUs from the community in the
James Lawson, Diane.
Yes, because James Lawson was there. All of his young people who were studying on violence all came from those HBCUs, and maybe some that were like more in the north of the Columbus River. And it's the same, it's the plate, and it's what you said, which is this is not because, even with deindustrialization, these have to be seen as policies. They're not it's not because, human progress means like technology, and it means, inherently some jobs will have to be lost because technology is so advanced that we don't need to pay workers to do certain things. We can replace them with automation. Like that's part of human progress and the whole landscape of human beings. But actually, it's a human policy.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if that is, let's say we use the technological explanation. If technology explained all of this, why does it seem only to hit Black community?
Exactly.
Understand what I'm saying? If it was that, why isn't it generalized? Why are white people experiencing it? I'm sorry, I didn't mean
No, and Like, so that's why I thought, oh wait, but this is connected because actually this question of a new program for this time, and how
Yes.
Alice was pointing out,
Yes.
in some ways we're not even at a point, like when you were describing the 5 elements of crisis, I mean, it almost feels overwhelming. So overwhelming of how much we're up against. Because actually when you read King's program for Chicago even, where he's like, okay, we've done the Southern movement, we've confronted Jim Crow, it's time to now confront the Northern crisis. Like what Baldwin always talks about. Why is there a ghetto? Why is there, like, there's no ghetto law. Like, it's not like New York City has a ghetto law where it's like, oh, you must live in Harlem. You must, like, be poor. There's no law, like Jim Crow law. So why is there almost an invisible law? What is the invisible law baked into society? And so when King's program for the North, in some ways, we're so deep in today's crisis that, like, all the proposals King has, we can't even propose it because those institutions he was talking about are different. Like he says, we're going to change the bank. We're going to confront the bank and make the bank give loans to Black families. Well, what you just said, the banks of back then are not the banks of today.
No.
I don't even know how to characterize the banks today. What are we up against? And even this, and then even the way King says, like, we have to confront, we've analyzed, at least in Chicago, what are the actual institutions of the state, of the city, that are holding up this invisible law of white supremacy, which infiltrates everything in our lives, from where you can find grocery stores, to where you're allowed to live, what quality of housing, to where your children go, and then on and on and on, juvenile detention, blah, 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 King goes into it. But we don't, not only must we investigate, like, where are the people today? Like, where were they pushed to? Like Serafina was saying, where did they push to? Where did they work? Where did they live? Where do they want to work? Where do they want to live? But also the question of, what are we up against? I mean, we don't, like I said, like, it's actually crazy when you think about, when you go through King's line by line program, and then you ask, you're like, okay, the housing authority is not the same anymore. The government is not the same anymore. Our city council people are not the same. I don't think they have even, they're not elected. I mean, who are the real rulers? And then this is something Alice had brought up when we were reading, because she made the point where, like, and the people's institutions are different.
Yes.
The Black churches are not the same. The unions are not the same. Because when King talks about it, he's like, we have so much potential because we do have people's institutions that are ready, if convinced, are ready to be part of this great people's movement. And I mean, we don't have the same institutions, but the question is, there must be capacity in the people somewhere. How are people organizing?
Yeah.
And the last thing I have to say, it's not like I'm not adding anything else. I'm just repeating what you said, because what you said about the moral imperative, it is so important. What we have in our favor is the moral imperative, is the revolution imperative. That actually really deep, where you said the model of the civil rights movement in King, not just the civil rights decade, but the Black freedom movement, where they were going with the Poor People's Campaign, even connecting war, basically being able to connect the moral imperative, where individual human beings, I mean, to be human is to care about the child, right? That is the condition of, I mean, if you want to make it as simple as possible, to be able to connect the moral imperative to the questions of democracy, to the questions of war, to questions of basically the political future, the civilizational future, is so deep. And I actually think it's so important to see it as the leading edge of always asking, like, okay, where is the moral imperative? Because
This is very important.
because even like, okay,
and then you can more accurately locate the ideological questions.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
See, by raising the moral imperative, the moral question, it's a way of raising the human question in all of its dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
It is the greatest. That's why, when we were in Chicago, Meghna and I were talking with Neha and Jahan, we were all together. Meghna said, did I think that religious movements, and we're not just talking about religion in like the evangelical Christians. We're talking about a movement grounded in the moral questions, i.e. the Black church, the Black gods, and so on. I said they're always more powerful than purely secular movements. And secular movements have to find their way to these great religious, moral movements. That is, and I think King and the civil rights and Black freedom movement proved that point. And that's why this ultra left, that's why Black Power and Stokely and them made a mistake. They attacked the strong hand in the name of a revolutionary imperative, thus separating the moral from the revolutionary imperative. There is no revolutionary imperative separate from the moral imperative. And the idea that you can separate them means that you then abandon the people. Okay, I'm sorry.
One last thing to build on you is, and that's why I think that actually also connects to what you said earlier in your remarks, where you said part of, I think, the funky business that America is in today, almost like where a lot of especially white people or those who believe in white standards hit this brick wall at this time, is that they're trying to carry this European or even British political assumption of if we can free the individual first, then society can be free. But the problem is,
I just put it another way. See, this is, Alice asked me this. She said when she goes to China, she wants to study the Chinese state more closely. See, this fake argument that we are protecting the individual and his and her rights from the incursion of the state. It's a BS argument. It's a bad faith argument. If I could, somebody can help me with it. I don't know if white people are capable alone of making the right argument, because they're so involved in distorting and lying, because that is a necessity given that you want to diminish the role of Black people in the overall thing of the moral imperative. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Yes, it's a very hard thing to deal with. Have you ever told the truth? Because they're not trying to protect themselves from the state. They want to use the state to uphold their view of the world.
Well, that's like, because I started listening to the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens interview. And I mean, to me, the reason why I'm so interested in knowing is because increasingly they're taking stances on Gaza. Then some ways I didn't expect them to take. So, especially Candace Owens, so unabashedly, she has been saying, she literally just came out and said, like, this is a genocide. And like, even to the point where Tucker Carlson, he interviewed this former Marine who I think is volunteering in Gaza, where he basically, the person he interviewed said, the IDF is without human decency. You have to go to that point. It's not, you have to even go to the level of the Israeli Defense Forces are without human decency. And the reason why I think the Epstein question is really important is because it is not just a question of, it's a question of moral, like human decency of, I think the American people increasingly, there's emerged, what seems to be is a question of morality. And it's almost like, because for us, we're like, oh, morality, of course morality has to do with how you want to run a society, right? For us, we're like, oh, what's political has to be moral, right? What's revolutionary has to be moral. I almost feel like when I was watching Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, she said this thing where she was like, basically she made this speech where she was like, I'm coming to the conclusion that, she basically says, I think there is such thing as a moral truth. She's like, there is something as a moral truth. And if Trump does not clarify the Epstein question, then he cannot be trusted. And I mean, this is essentially, increasingly people are reaching a place where they're like, oh, wait, moral truth has something to do with society. And I don't know, and it's almost like you want to yell to the screen to all the people in the country, like, King and the Black Freedom Movement, if only people saw it as a revolution, if people saw it as important as it is, if people could just bust through the reluctance to want to see the enormous ginormity of King, there's something, that is, I feel like King is still this like unrecognized, unresolved huge weight for the American people, like like the father of a nation that no one wants to see as the father. Like, it's like, I mean, the path out is right there. The whole, like, instead of being able to like free yourself from this belief that, if we solve the freedom of the individual, like the European thing, free yourself from the individual, then you can free society. Rather, if we can free society, then the individual can find happiness. The individual can find peace. Like, I don't know. There's something in that. I know I'm not like saying it well, but
something. And then I'm trying to, apropos what you're saying. You see, one of the mistakes of the Black misleadership class is to go from the civil rights and the moral question to politics. And I think, from the standpoint of a people's movement, we have to replace politics as much as possible with morality. I don't want to elect a politician to be the mayor of Philadelphia because look what we got.
Come on. Yeah.
I want a person who I know them, and this is what I think Candace is saying. I want to know your moral values. And that's where Trump is going to fall. You thought you were God, and you thought you could do whatever you wanted to do. And he was involved in that trafficking, a model agency. Come on, money, who are you thinking for? Wasn't no model agency, it was a trafficking front. So I think as Candace Owens has said, he has thus made himself incapable of leading the people of this country. Well, let me let Shantu come in and then
No, I just wanted to build on some of the things that Alice, Emily, and Doc said. This question of this political analysts and podcasters and so on. I mean, the Alex Trainer, I agree with what Alice was saying, because his entire focus, like, okay, fine, you are allowed to have a certain version of what you believe in. Like, you can believe that Trump has all these like hidden agendas and he's not showing all his cards and so on and so forth. But I was struck by how much his analysis basically depends on this idea that the state, like, this is a question Serafina was raising, that the state can only be consolidated or can just be consolidated on the basis of strategy of political actors.
Interesting.
Because this is also what Alice was saying, I'm repeating at this point. The value of Douglas McGregor's commentary on this was that he actually makes the people a category in his thinking, where he's saying that no matter what happens, what is the final outcome of this Epstein case, or whatever ends up happening vis-a-vis, peace talks with Russia and Ukraine or all of that, you cannot deny the fact that in the ways in which Trump is going forward, he's alienating the people, and they are constantly, increasingly left with nothing but distrust and moral contempt for him and rest of his, the rest of the ruling class. And the fact that this is an important part of democracy, this is an important part of the democratic struggle in a country, seems to somehow be lost on geopolitical.
Can I just say something? Because they don't see democracy as a struggle to achieve a higher level.
They see
of
it in its
humanity.
form, like it's like a form of the state or whatever.
Or an election.
And I think even when I heard you talk about it, and I was trying to like put these things together, and it's not like Douglas McGregor gets all of it right, but the fact that the people becomes a category in his thinking. And this is something that, and it reminded me a lot of the question of leadership in general and governance in particular. And like everybody has been saying, it also reminded me a lot about King, because King was not what made King was not that he was the elected leader of the SCLC or that he was the elected leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association. What made him a leader and what won him the trust of like thousands and thousands and thousands of Black people, and not just Black people, a whole nation really, was his moral consistency. The fact that he would live his life the way he preached. He would be willing to do what he asked his people to do, and he was willing to put his life down
Yes.
to achieve this goal of freedom, not just for Black people, but then for everybody, and to basically have this revolution of values, which basically changes and completely upends what Americans think of themselves, like who are we in the world and what is this nation even about. And this is why I also appreciated what you said about how this, like the level of the crisis, the fact that it's inching closer and closer towards a stage where it will be completely irreversible.
Yes.
This makes it necessary to understand that you can't undo this by just a series of protests or just those kinds of activism-y politics. And it reminded me a lot about what Du Bois says in his autobiography, The Dusk of Dawn, where right at the beginning, when he's setting up the whole trajectory of his thinking from his early years to later years, he says that in the beginning, when I was a young man, I used to think, okay, I've identified the problem of the 20th century. The problem of modernity is race, the problem of the color line. And I used to think that a series of brilliant assaults will be able to, through that, Black people could basically transcend this problem and go forward. But then I saw the unreason of white society.
Right. Yeah.
I saw that this wasn't really, the problem wasn't that they don't understand. The problem was, like everybody has been saying, it is a deliberate choice. It's a deliberate choice to keep 1/9 of the population in servile conditions, in inhuman conditions, and to perpetuate that oppression, that poverty, that lack of opportunity, lack of even being able to imagine a future year after year after year after year. And no matter where they make the slightest advance, you go in and you disrupt it, which is also what I heard, what all of the examples that Emily was giving about Nashville and so on. That is what it shows, that deliberate interest in stopping that kind of progress towards a higher stage, higher freedom. And I mean, I'm struck by what Du Bois, the conclusion he came to, where he said it can't be a series of brilliant assaults. It has to be a long siege to change the very fabric, to change the values which every individual in this country holds important. And that's what we have been saying, is this really becomes then a question of civilization.
Yes.
Like what is the defining characteristic of American civilization? And looking at everything that we've been saying, I mean, it becomes almost undeniable that it really has to come from the boys' game, the Black freedom struggle, because they were not really looking at the forms of the state or laws or policies. They were saying as this is a human problem, and we have to transcend it through the capacity of human beings to assert that a different kind of life is possible, a different moral imperative should be driving us to decide how we are going to act in this time.
So I actually was thinking about what Emily was saying about this invisible law that seems to exist, which is responsible for this modern method of residential segregation, keeping Black people separate from everybody else. It is a contradiction to what Du Bois would have advocated in terms of race contact, which is trying to get to know people, right? Man must know man, and that sort of very fundamental wish or desire in human beings is sort of limited by this invisible hand, and invisible law, and that's what made me remember the invisible hand in economics. And I know there are economists in the house, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand this law properly, it is that if an individual makes selfish or self-motivated decisions in order to improve their economic conditions, there are almost unintentional consequences that result in the betterment of the entire economy.
Absolutely.
And you can sort of juxtapose that to what you were talking about in terms of a moral and civilizational crisis,
Yes.
where
Yes.
however, the degree of freedom of the individual is responsible for the degree of freedom of society as a whole. And I think that, when Adam Smith said, accept the invisible hand, it was also turning in motion a societal change where, the human being was also changing and adopting this individualistic ideology. And I think that, the moral and civilizational crisis and what you mentioned after that, the crisis in terms of science, knowledge, ideology, I think all of that comes together in looking at the situation of, say, North Philly today. Like, you can sort of extrapolate economics and policy and governmental regulation. You just look at the state of North Philly. You see a group of people being kept away from their brothers almost, they built this nation. They're as much as a part of this nation as everybody else, but then they're invisible. They are invisible. The laws surrounding them, governing them, are invisible. And this economic question that we have in terms of the debt, it severely affects everybody. But then, of course, when we look at the bottom rung of the ladder, which is black men, it affects them the most. I mean, I think I just looked up. Our GDP is actually 30 trillion.
Say that again.
Our GDP is 30 trillion.
How many billion?
30 trillion.
30 trillion.
That's not true. 23 trillion.
That was in 2023.
2019.
2023. I
Go ahead.
in the second quarter, of 2025, it said 30.3 trillion.
Really?
Right. That's where they get the 120% number.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, because I think that it's interesting because the GDP has continued to grow over the last 2-3 years, whereas people have just become poorer and poorer. And how is that possible, right? How is it, where is all of this money going? Why is our debt steadily rising? I think the way that I understood debt is that when the United States spends more money than it makes, you are in debt and you have to borrow money from other nations or public investors in the United States to sort of balance that. The last time we didn't have a deficit was 2001. And that is when, as you were mentioning, in the 2000s is when all of these wars of attrition and regime change began. So there is a very significant correlation and, a line you can draw between economic decisions that have been made, war abroad, as well as the current, situation, economic and cultural situation of Black people and in Philadelphia, in places like Philadelphia. I think that Alex Trainer, I saw that. I saw the video. Scott Ritter at least said that, okay, I have denounced Trump. I was very on board with Trump at one point, and now I'm like, what he's doing is unacceptable. I think that his rhetoric has also diminished. I don't see him around all that often. Alex Trainer, on the other hand, has maintained that there's more to this than meets the eye. I think that the reason why he talks about the British Empire is because he relates that to the British intelligence, which he considers the most sophisticated in the world, and the British intelligence is actually the institution that carried out all these assassinations in the recent past, as well as what he believes tried to assassinate Trump. So he thinks that Trump is actually trying to go against that and trying to attack that. That's what I thought.
he was saying. But Douglas McGregor makes a very interesting point, really. I agree with everybody. He does say that, there is agency in the people, and if the current conditions, which is Trump not following through on anything that he has promised to the people, being a populist candidate, being somebody who was, who won the popular vote, betraying the people in this way. The only thing that he has somewhat done is his stance on immigration. Even that has fallen short. He's gone too extreme in a lot of ways and not enough in a lot of different ways. And so the people are frustrated. And I think that this is like Douglas McGregor's article, I feel like gave us a kind of comprehensive view of what we are seeing in the American society today. But as others have said, it does come from his position as an ex-intelligence military guy who's working in a room full of white men for years. You don't have that vision of that, say, a king would have. The people constituting a movement. The solution for him is still in strategy.
It's still what?
In strategy.
And pessimism, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of cynicism as well. And even the article that we were talking about, the Adam Tooze article, where he's trying to compare China to the United States and saying how China does not have a lot of immigrants because he's stating a language barrier, a sociological, cultural barrier, and he's saying that but China has managed to have these global cities, where there's finance and trade and the economy is booming, but he sort of attributes that to, he compares that to America, and he says that America is this whole melting pot of all these different kinds of people, but it's not really helping. But look at China; they have like 0.08% immigration because of the language barrier and all that. But I feel like what we missed out on is the civilizational difference. What happens when a state actually tries to fulfill itself to people? And I think that is something that I at least would like to keep in mind while I'm also trying to look further into China as well as trying to understand the crisis that we're going.
I want to respond what you said.
Let me let Michelle come in.
Do we need to end?
Yeah, we do soon.
Oh, before
Say
we
about 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh,
Wouldn't you say 10 or 15?
okay. Well, I wanted to go back to something that was said earlier, and it was in your remarks when you talked about this thing of like perfecting our work. Like that had really stood out to me because then we had talked a little bit about it with also what Alice and other people were saying, like scientifically or sociologically discovering the specifics or the concrete aspects of this crisis, but also scientifically discovering or uncovering what the basis for a new unity would be. But I think you also said like, the people have not yet found the new way in which we organize and struggle. And yeah, it just really made an impression on me. And I was also thinking about it as the conversation went on, because there's like a few things I want to say, but earlier when you were talking about the South in the post-Reconstruction period or the sharecropping period, when the white supremacist social system was so much legalized, like I was thinking about Frederick Douglass because I had just read his autobiography for the first time a few weeks ago, and I think I underestimated what I would gain like from a study of his life, because I had never read the direct testament of someone who had been a slave, right? And usually my origin point is Du Bois, which is the generation afterward. But I was thinking about his struggle for freedom because first of all, it's so memorable because he spends the first few chapters talking about that, articulating the experience of being a slave. You know, like I think something we've read a lot about is, okay, and then this person was lynched, or what it did to the consciousness of Black folk to see the lynching of Emmett Till. But like, it was even more to hear Frederick Douglass describing that psychological and like physical violence of what was done to the enslaved, like to enslaved people, families, everything, just everything. But then a lot of his autobiography, he talks about his struggle to reach the North and how he achieves it. But finally, that once he gets to the North, he said what he was free to do then was not that he had achieved the substance of freedom in and of itself, because he talks about reaching the North and like, you're not clothed, like, you know, you're hardly clothed, you're still hungry, how are you going to find a job? But he says at the very end, I was now free to work and to struggle for the freedom of my people, which I would dedicate the rest of my life to, which is the abolition of my people. And but like, I just appreciate the way we're talking because it's helping me better see the different stages in the struggle for freedom, the general achievement of freedom for the American people as a whole, beginning with Black folk, because then we have the legal achievement of freedom, you know, the end of slavery, and then we have the civil rights movement, which effectively takes care of white supremacy in more or less like all legal aspects. But I think that really the struggle for the achievement of the substance of freedom is still what we're talking about. And I appreciate the conversation because I think we're getting a sense of how complex it is. And we have to be able to scientifically find where the different touchstones are and what will actually move the struggle forward. And especially like the human moral capacity in the context of that. Because the other thing that I was trying to make sense of, especially after Purba was speaking and like Alice and Emily, this thing of why is the moral choice now so centered to the ideological, political, social, like civilizational character of this nation? And like, why is something so moral halting a forward movement? And it's something I wanted to bring up because even Purba, when you were speaking, it made me think about how the new shape of the American state, like to me, it would effectively have to be a civilizational state where it can no longer just be a series of laws, but because something was so morally broken by the creation of white supremacy, beginning with the slave system, like 2-3 centuries ago, like something morally has to be restored in the nation as a whole that also like is clearly lacking in this white bourgeois system of governance we have now. And I think it's something I'm trying to make sense of also because of, or like to put together with what King was saying at the end of his life. Because, for example, some of us have been reading Where Do We Go From Here Again? And I think like appreciating new depth to some of the things he was saying. And even in the first chapter of Where Do We Go From Here, he makes some like very staggering assessments because the movement has continued for 12, 13 years at this point. And he's making that full political assessment just 1 year before he's assassinated. And something he says is that everything we have achieved up to this point has come at very little cost, especially to the white community, because of how little it really took for white and Black brothers to sit together at the lunch counter. I mean, like, how much of a true cost is that really? He's like, what's much harder about the struggle in the North is that a real sacrifice will have to be made on behalf of the white community in order to create jobs, in order to end the ghetto. Like a new state, a new nation has to be restored.
Yeah, that's your question. I know we have to get ready to.
Oh, okay.
But would you assess that the financial or material cost would be greater than the moral cost to white people?
What do you mean, like a greater cost?
Well, we know it will cost a lot materially, let's say, trillions of dollars.
Right.
But would it cost white people more morally to transform themselves morally?
I
Does that- I
I
don't know
think
whether that
so.
makes sense
I think
to
so, but also like
They're
but
not
also
gonna do it.
You don't think they're going to do
They're
that?
not gonna do it. They have too much to lose.
But they also have so much to gain.
See, that's the question.
well, I think the
Because I think, and where do we go from here? King ultimately says that the moral cost, because the bar has to be reset, and they can't be the judge.
They would have to admit their atrocities, and they're not gonna do it. They're not gonna do that. And then they have to do it power too. It's just, that's over the top.
See, that's,
I mean, it has to happen, but their reality is not there.
this is a hard thing. They have not thus far showed the capacity.
What other choice do they have?
Yeah.
See, this, like, she said, well, what other choice do they have? I mean, it's that existential moment. Either or.
They have to think human.
That's why I was like, what keeps it together? Like, is it the KKK in the South? Like, because there's still racism, but like,
Because they have not yet fundamentally changed morally.
right,
Who they are morally is who pretty much they've been.
right.
I don't know. I just wanted to ask that maybe we can pursue this next
I think we
week.
should go back.
Maybe really,
Excuse me, I want to say one thing. To say I don't know is to say you have wisdom.
you say you don't.
That's the
Don't
question.
know.
That's the
Well,
question.
that's the thing. To say I don't know is wisdom.
Is what?
Don't,
Wisdom.
Is wisdom.
you don't know. Don't know what they do.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
You don't. And that's,
We just don't know.
it's the question that y'all.
We must.
Right.
And it's not the answer. It's a question.
Stimulating to make change.
Yes,
Well, can I just add one more quick thing? Is back to our work, or the perfection of our work, or the striving of our work. I also just wanted to say, like Baldwin, I think it might be from the Bible, but that phrase of the evidence of things not seen
Yeah.
also kept coming back to me, because I think what we're recovering and discovering is the evidence of things not seen. And what is the true soul and the true striving of the American people? Or will there really be no more American people, you know? Yeah.
That's why they can so easily go to the nuclear brink.
Yeah.
Blow it all. It's going to be my way, and we'll
Yes.
destroy the
Yes.
whole thing.
And I think I think it needs to be studied. Like,
Even to raise that question
Yep.
is the depth of immorality.
yes.
To even consider, that says so much. And this is what I think Trump has done and should be done, because he has shown himself to be a moral degenerate.
Yes.
And we can't afford that at this point. And this is why what John is saying, they can't do it. That's what Prophet Cherry would have said. That's what Ishmael Muhammad said. They can't do it. So it has to be other forces. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think.
Oh, could I do a mini announcement for
Oh,
your
yes,
lecture
please,
this
please.
Tuesday? Well, we've been talking about the scientific assessment of the people. I feel like that comes from like Du Bois. So I'm just doing a really small bridge. I won't overdo it. But essentially, I feel like what you did today in terms of like laying all this out, and also this idea that you had like at least 5 fronts to this crisis, like from deindustrialization all the way to the moral and civilizational. Like, I feel like that is just how Du Bois characterizes like the problem of modernity being a problem of problems, but not too complex enough or like too multifaceted enough for us to find out what that is, even if it's different than Du Bois's time or King's time. But we do have to make an effort to find out, an assessment of the people, assessment of white folk and Black folk, and also like the dimensions of the crisis, which is why I think your lecture on Tuesday at the Lucian Blackwell Library will be really illuminating, and also to define or to further our study of Black gods, and also to insert this
question around art and the search for Black gods, which I think will be really important to all of this that we're discussing and studying. But yeah, the lecture is at 4:30 at the Lucian Blackwell Library on 52nd Street, and we'll be recording it after, I guess uploading afterwards, Tuesday. And then it'll also be what kicks off our new Du Bois reading group, which will read Dark Water starting the following Tuesday, same time at the Lucian Blackwell Library. So yeah, I think we're all really excited because we're just entering so much new territory, and it just helps to like continue clarifying as we move forward all of these ideas. Yeah. I know we have to leave now, so that's all I'll say.
Okay, we're ending, yeah, we're gonna end. I know it's a little early, and I feel like we could have talked for another few hours, but there's a film on Sunra at the Black Star Festival at the.
My brother played with someone.
Her brother played with Sunra.
Yeah, my brother Reggie played the saxophone.
What?
Passed a couple of years ago. Yeah, he played Sunrise. He's on Sunrise album that he did in Paris or France somewhere.
Oh, they traveled together.
Oh, Georgia. And a young man had the album, and my brother named
You never know.
That's my brother name. His name, that's his real name, Reginald.
What's his name?
Reginald Hudgens. But he was known as Malik here in Philadelphia. As a truck flat company, they know him as Malik. But his name is Reginald Hudgens. But it's Reginald Hudgens on the album. My big brother, my oldest brother.
Wow, that's good.
Of 8. I'm the
8? Stop playing. Oh my gosh.
youngest. Cynthia Hudgens.
Oh, okay, now we know the full.
And also, my brother.
See if there's any seats available.
Okay, so we're gonna try, we only have